What's he building in there? What's he building in there? We have a right to know.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 25 of Reframing the Narrative, and we have just hit the quarter century mark. I think this is where we put the celebration emojis and just take a second to reflect. This journey that we started in January is now past mid-year in the golden age of 2025, and what better way to celebrate that than to talk about how democracy is a spectator sport? And Jake, good to see you as always. I'm going to let you tee this conversation off because you wrote a nice Substack that I just added a little bit to, but it's definitely yours. And why don't you lead this conversation? You put a lot of salient thoughts out there, and I want to let you kind of tee up where we go from here.
Okay. Well, thanks, PJ. It's always good to be here with you outside under a pretty clear sky right now. So, I've been motivated to write this kind of article and address this issue of spectating. And it really, I feel like it's a piece with a theme that's really been flowing through our topics in our conversations ever since we started 24 episodes ago on this podcast. And that's where you pay your attention. And as part of that is just being mindful of all the distractions and waste of energy, waste of time, all the pitfalls that are laid out, all the rabbit holes that we can go down, the false prophets, the false heroes, the false narratives, the fake science. And I'm not an arbiter of what is true or not, but I can definitely recognize a lot of these things that take us away from genuinely making a difference. And here we are in cyberspace, putting our voices and images out on a podcast and hoping that that makes a difference. And maybe we're guilty of contributing to just being online and just talking online. But I like to think that part of what we're doing is opening ourselves up to greater co creative possibilities that include maybe linking up in cyberspace, but bringing that beyond that realm to real action. And that real action can be on any kind of agenda, anything that people feel is important to them, and in any fashion. So it could be like meeting up at an event like Confluence and going further beyond the bounds of that place and time. Or it could just be integrating a change in your own life when you notice a problem, when you discern something. And so I think the beginning of a process of a creative process of making a difference, trying to change behaviors and change your own consciousness is recognizing where you're stumbling and maybe just wasting time. And I believe that there's a real close relationship between professional sports and we are encouraged to participate in known as democracy and the democratic process and all the candidates and the voting. It's so important to get your voice out there and make your vote count. And this is the most important election in our lifetime and all that kind of thing. And the forms that participation in democracy, at least in America, and I lived in an Asian country and it was even more crazy, like grassroots, everyone involved situation there, um, are they remind me of sports and the way we divide into our tribes and the way we end up kind of settling on this on taking a side, one or the other side, and there's usually only two sides as well, and and just demonizing the other side. They're the enemy. We got to beat them. Our guys got to win. That kind of thing, and then the cycle continues. whether it's a new season in sports or whether it's the next election cycle and they literally call it a cycle or a season. So those were the motivations for me to sit down and try and write this article about the similarities between being a sports fan and participating in this system known as democracy.
Yeah, and just as an extension of that thought, and I was just thinking about everything that you just said, and having just read the article draft, you could really make an analogy to everything we see in politics and in sports, also to professional wrestling. And I think about the movie Idiocracy, where the president is literally a pro wrestling guy and making a mockery of the political debates. And honestly, I feel like we're not that far off from what we've seen in the last 5 to 10 years. It really has become pro wrestling quality type of uh good guy versus the villain and throwing your popcorn. And yeah, how many times have people shouted so loudly at the other bad side and thrown popcorn and booed and hissed? And what really changed? I love that comment in the article that all the action that actually happens in the owner's box has nothing to do with the fans in the stands, right? They can boo as loud as they want, but they're never going to influence the moves that are made for the team or within the stadium or anything like that. And but I think there's this fine line of people wanting to make a difference and do something, but then they get caught up in one of the many mouse traps that are laid out there for them to spin their wheels and waste their time. And the reality of the situation is you can't vote any harder and make anything really happen. You can't, no matter how much you boo at Aaron Judge, he still may hit that home run. It's just the reality of the situation, and it's all just a big theater for everyone to participate in. And kind of to your point about confluence, I feel like there's so many other ways that we could be building and creating together that make more of a difference than getting caught up in this false dichotomy of red versus blue, or Hulk Hogan versus Andre the Giant, or the Red
You're
Sox
dating
versus the
yourself
Yankees.
there.
Whatever it is. Yeah, I don't even know who the current pro wrestler heroes are. I grew up with the Hulkster. Unfortunately,
Superfly
I
Snuka
ate my
here.
unfortunately, I took my vitamins, but the saying the prayer part that the Hulkster had told all his Hulkamaniacs to do, that was the good part. But vitamins, as we've all learned recently from Agent's great work, are nothing but poison. But I digress there. But yeah, we're given so much theater to participate in and spin our wheels. And I'll take it even a step further than that. That's not only in that doesn't just happen in the mainstream version of theater that's on there on CNN or Fox or whatever your flavor is. This happens also in the quote unquote alternative truth community. It harkens back to Albert Pike, where he said, when a hero is needed, we will supply one. And there's all these different personalities out there that become these heroes that people will blindly follow, even though there are very, in many cases, obvious character flaws around them. And I certainly understand decades ago there weren't that many voices out there, so that's how Alex Jones got to where he is. But I think in today's day and age, people wouldn't choose such an extreme personality, although he clearly still has an audience. But um, there's just all these different characters and personalities for us to be distracted by and to listen to their faux solutions that also get us to spin our wheels. And it's really just a matter of where we're choosing to pay our attention, as we've talked about many times. But ultimately, it's a zero sum game in terms of the time we have in our life. And if we choose to follow this wrestler or a different wrestler who's supposed to be the good guy, whether that's RFK or name your favorite hero of the month, it doesn't matter because it all really leads to the same conclusion, and we're all just fans in the stands booing or cheering on cue with whoever we decided the hero was.
Totally. And one outcome of that fandom that we see in politics is the whole trust the plan, bro, kind of thing where people just they just put their faith in somebody that they don't actually know who's been packaged and sold to them. Like, let's just name a few names: Zev Zelenko, Peter McCullough, Gardner Malone, RFK Jr., uh, ivermectin, all these ready-made packaged solutions, and then when right before their eyes they can see that there's something afoot here. RFK is actually talking about making vaccines safe again, or everybody needs to get wearables. Meanwhile, all the tech bros are surrounding Orange Man at his inauguration, and the very next day they're announcing the Stargate initiative, which is half a uh, half a trillion in essentially making everything mRNA and designer mRNA drugs, and the technocracy is just there to feed the technocracy. And if you read the actual executive order that created the Doge, all it did was rename an existing department called the Department of Digital Efficiency, I believe, something like that. Otherwise, how could you get a budget and the legal framework for the creation of a new agency overnight? It wasn't created, it was just renamed. And if you look at this kind of thing, you might, I want to propose that those paying attention will probably observe that it's building towards something, yet they're sold at the same time something that'll make them stand down and not take action, whether it's the hope of, well, we'll get him next time on the ball field, next season, that kind of thing. We just need to make the right trade. Or if it's like, well, we got our guy in there now, he's got to do good, right? All the hope invested in RFK Jr., even though if you're paying attention, you probably weren't fooled. And that brings me back to 2008 and the disillusionment that was just running rampant. I was living abroad and I could feel it across the ocean in Asia from coming from the US, and people were just, I used the term shell shocked in the article about just the constant war and the constant campaigns and Wesley Clark's 7 countries that we're going to go after, and we're going to end up rolling back Syria, and then we're going to take Iran. And guess where we are? We're at country number 7 right now.
I said, are we still going to war with Iraq? And he said, oh, it's worse than that. This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
And so people they sensed that. They were disillusioned with the system and the warmongering and the war party being in power, and they fell for it again. They fell for the empty suit of Barack Hussein Obama, who continued the bombing, bombed weddings. He was Obama, really. And he was kind of like the scion of George W. Bush, or his father, Sr., in the way he actually conducted foreign policy. And then we see the same kind of thing, people just bracing for impact of that witch, Hillary, right? And then, whoa, Orange Man saved the day. They've invested their hope in that. And then we get a scamdemic, and people stood down and they took the shot. They said, trust the plan. They wore Fauci shirts that said, in Fauci we trust. And they were sold another bill of goods. Meanwhile, they're just issuing trillions of dollars in extra budgetary funds that resulted in rampant inflation, and that got pinned on the next guy, the incompetent diaper-wearing hair sniffer who succeeded Orange Man. And so that reinvested the the MAGA crowd in MAGA. And of course, the ear incident in Butler helped to rally people around Orange Man as well and coalesce that basically the fix was in and he was going to come back. So the parallels to sports and investment, when I get to the real crux of it, it's really the personal, the energy that people place in the whole political process and in the system there's very little distinction between the political system and the money involved, the kinds of personalities, the heroes, the celebrities, the controversies, the debates, and the same sort of things happen in the realm of sports fandom. And so I just had to point that out. And I don't want to judge anybody for being a sports fan or for voting. That's up to you. It's really like we constantly talk about during our conversations on this platform. We say, spend wisely. Look where you're paying your attention. But maybe there is a better way for you, and that's up to you to discover where you're going to invest your time. And it's okay to be a sports fan, and it's okay to watch the news. I'm not judging that at all.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there that I agree with and would like to comment on, but I'm going to take things a slightly different direction, just thinking about how people fall into this illusion of basically all of it being a big spectator sport. I'm going to continue running with the pro wrestling theme because I think it's so applicable here that there's always two sides and everyone has to pick a team for the side. And thinking about even the recent faux drama between Redman and Elon Musk and, the back and forth, it just really blew my mind going on Facebook, which I would have never gotten back onto if it weren't for this business I started. And believe it or not, it's a really effective spying tool to see what people are up to when you're in the business of people. But
I saw
that
your
that
post yesterday. Guess
but
where I
that being
was?
but that being said, you know, looking at people on Facebook and them participating in this faux drama and believing it's real and making comments about it and getting upset about it. And to me, you're never going to convince people that it, just like when I was in grade school and watching, I'll just go back, I'll date myself again, watching the Hulkster and the Iron Sheik and Andre the Giant and all those legendary wrestlers. You couldn't have convinced me when I was in grade school then that it wasn't real. I mean, that was as real as I could imagine. It was there on TV. How could it be wrong? How could it be fake, right? Well, when you really start looking behind the curtain, you realize sports are rigged, politics are rigged. Of course, grow old enough in life and you realize that wrestling's rigged too. I mean, everything is a big show for you. And the underlying theme here is that that show is made real in people's mind by tell lie vision. And it really is a spell casting device. I think that not only is there what we see, but there's also the subliminal that's being broadcast into other parts of our mind and influencing us in ways that we don't even realize. And it creates a true state of hypnosis in the people who watch it. And then they start to believe, even if you show them the evidence that what they're seeing isn't real, they they wouldn't believe it. They're hypnotized by the spell. And it takes everyone their own path of realization to really break that spell. You can't break it for them. I suppose in a long series of questioning, putting seeds in their minds that maybe that something will click for them, but I just don't think people are going to see it with you trying to force feed the reality on them. But unfortunately, most people that we run to on a day-to-day basis, their reality begins and ends with the TV and or what's online, but that's really just an extension of television. And it's the same spellcaster as with now just putting it through your computer screen. So I think that's a really important element of this discussion. And I've said it before in past podcasts. Look, I still watch TV from time to time. I still participate in the bread and circuses. Just like you said, I'm not here to judge anyone, but I'm very cognizant of when I'm doing that and when it's becoming too much and where I could be doing better things with my time. And I think there's just a balance like anything in life. Um, you eat too much popcorn, you eat too much candy, you'll get fat, but a little bit every now and then isn't going to kill you. So, I think it's just it's important for people, as you were saying, to really realize where they're paying their time and attention and evaluating that in the bigger scheme of things of what they could be accomplishing or building otherwise.
Yeah, it really is it's an investment of time and energy. To go back to wrestling, at the risk of dating myself a little bit more clearly, if my gray stubble hasn't already, I attended a professional wrestling extravaganza back in my home area uh, quite a long time ago when they had, like I mentioned, Superfly Snuka and Andre the Giant on the bill. And even though my good friend of mine in high school and I didn't really buy into it being real, but we were still kind of fans because that's what was on TV on Friday nights back in the 80s, by the way. And so they came to the county center where we were, and we went and we were all ready to be convinced of how exciting and maybe not real, but at least not fake it was. And I'll never forget that feeling of just it was like the Wizard of Oz where you see the guy behind the curtain. Weird. There was none of that authenticity actually being there in the arena. It was all that authenticity only came through on TV. And being there just left us feeling so empty, like, come on, this is just lame. And we had, I mean, for high school kids with just allowance to spend who had invested in those tickets, we had limited budget, yet we walked out on it. We were just like, this is so lame. And so to your point, just without, as I like to say, the Talmud vision and the trickery that goes on, even in a live setting, that thing you can't pull that off. It just left us so empty, and we never watched wrestling on a Friday night again, ever after that. And I guess that really was kind of a lifelong lesson that what you see on the screen doesn't represent the reality, and that things can be staged.
Yeah, and just as an aside, I think about when I was a kid and watching all of that, and I brought up the Hulkster before and him talking to kids about making the right choices and taking your vitamins, saying your prayers, whatever. And when you actually learn about who he was and the people were who were portraying these characters, you find out that they were actually big drug users and um, before they made the big stage, typically night to night would be partying until the wee hours of the morning, spending everything they earned in the bar or on drugs. And then the next day they were talking to kids about how to live their lives. And I think there's a really good parallel there to politicians. So many people put them in this light that they really don't deserve. And I would say they're just like us, but they're not really because they've made that decision to sell their lives and their souls to fund darker agendas that are much bigger than them. And that kind of goes back to what we were saying episodes ago about heroes or zeros. So many people put these people on this untouchable pedestal, and unfortunately, they don't realize the reality behind the people that they're actually designating in some way as sacred. And that's where they get caught in the illusion. And then, to your point, the Faucis of the world or Redmen tell them to put some experimental solution in their arm, and they've already decided these people can't be wrong, that they have their best interests at heart. And that's where the decisions get real, where TV becomes reality, and that's where it's really dangerous. And I even look at again, going to the alternative truth community, that in my view, there are a number of people out there who are promoting either toxic things for your body or toxic things for your soul. But because they've established some level of trust with their viewership, the subtle coercion to do something against their best interest is missed. And unfortunately, I've seen this cult of personality many times over in the truth community, where people just become blind to what they're hearing because someone has said enough of the truth, it's good enough for them, so they can't be a bad person.
Yeah, and um, we get involved in the personalities as well. If you think of pro wrestling, the pro wrestling continues to this day, and it's still the same sport. They're still as fake as ever. It's just the names have changed. So when you get caught up in a particular figure or celebrity in sports or politics, the same thing happens. Like I mentioned in the article, you root for the laundry, the name on the front of the uniform rather than the player's name, because players change, they get traded, they retire, they get called up and down, whatever happens in their lives, and you end up just rooting. You're a fan of that team because you've made your loyalty overt and you've declared it. So it's kind of the same thing. You get involved in these personalities at the time, but the game goes on. And so unless you see beyond that, you and recognize how people let their guard down when they get attached to those individuals, they don't take a step back and realize that the game continues. So they'll give you a villain, they'll give you somebody that you want to take down. They get people crying for blood, for revenge. They cry and they say, lock her up. Or they'll say, he's got 34 felony convictions, lock him up, whatever the case being. But the game continues. And so, as I was mentioning in the article, and you noted as well, it's like the owners and the general managers proceed as usual, and the league benefits from controversy. Even like drug suspensions, things like that, anything is news in sports. Or there was a football player who was abusing dogs or something like that. You might know that case, right?
Michael Vick.
Michael Vick, that's right. So it's like Barnum said, right? If it's 15 minutes of fame, it's good for the league as long as it's getting attention. Doesn't matter. A little controversy here or there. You, and then that whole arc of the heroes are built up, then they're destroyed, they're taken down, and then a new one replaces them. But the show must go on. And if you take a step back and observe things in the political realm, when did voting really change the nature of this system? A couple of years ago, I was listening to a podcast, and there was whatever topic of the moment was really hot among the constitutional conservatives. And my favorite podcaster, Legal Man, he hosts a podcast called The Quash. He was making so much fun of Mark Levin at the time, uh, because Mark Levin was literally calling for his listeners to scream, get angry, and jump up and down and literally vote harder. And it was just so comical when you have a certain perspective on something like that. And he literally told his listeners to stomp up and down and scream. Yeah, that's really going to change things in the halls of power, wherever they may be.
Yeah, there's plenty of ways, and going back to what we were alluding to earlier in this conversation, there's plenty of ways for us to waste our time. And I think about even back during the scamdemic, there were certain personalities who were calling for people to completely separate themselves from society and start over and build little villages and kumbaya and live off the grid, which all those things by themselves in theory sound like good ideas, but I've never seen it work once with any of the people that I've ever known in those communities. And ultimately, what I've observed is it often leads to burnout and depression because they're trying to take on a system that's far bigger and more powerful than them. So instead of influencing change in their day-to-day lives, they have this idea that they can somehow remove themselves completely from the beast system and build something outside of it. And again, I commend those who've made the effort, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think largely this was put out there for people to waste their time and not really accomplish anything. That's my personal view on it. And I think another great example of that, and I know you have a slightly different opinion here, but I feel that a lot of this effort to declare yourself a sovereign citizen and use a series of paperwork to um, say that you no longer belong to the system and that they can't touch you, that you don't have to pay taxes or anything of the like. Again, I would love to find a loophole that actually worked where I don't have to support the system, but we were born into the system, and I don't think there's really any true way to escape it. Of course, we can decide where what we consent to and what we don't, but I think that there's a lot of those traps out there where people can get really involved and honestly leave themselves very exposed to the powers that be to really mess with their lives and take further control of them. So again, I just bring this all up because I think that there are a lot of these big name personalities in the freedom or truther community who have these solutions that sound good on paper but are actually big mouse traps for you to at at minimum waste your time, and maybe worse than that, do some do some irreversible damage to your life. And I think that that's where, again, we just really have to use discernment and everything when we're deciding where to invest our time and who to be listening to.
Yeah, I think we have different takes on that particular subject, but to mostly align with you on that, and I can't give any legal advice. I think it really comes down to people's choice and how they want to proceed. But one takeaway that we can recognize from that space, and by the way, sovereign and citizen are mutually exclusive things. Citizens are slaves, they're not sovereign. But one takeaway from just observing the legal system and how some people advise others to operate or how they carry themselves is just to be mindful that everything you do is considered contracting with others. And it's a really good principle just to carry as a guiding principle, whether it's in business or it's just in, we sign marriage contracts. So we are contracting with people over all sorts of things. And another way of looking at that is just you're giving something in exchange for something. So whether it's energy or attention, it's the same principle as paying attention. You are contracting psychically with your energy and if not your finances when you go about your daily life on various levels. Your point is well taken, and I think it's good to keep in mind that principle of contracting, and you literally are deciding what to pay and how to pay, where to pay in all sorts of exchanges in our lives, including whether you subscribe to the Disney Channel or something like that. Could be as small and trivial as that.
Yeah, and just to take it a step further, I do believe there's such thing as spiritual contracts that we make either wittingly or unwittingly, that again, going to the idea of where we're paying our attention, that even what we let into our eyes or in our ears to process can create spiritual contracts or some sort of spiritual enslavement or even just influence. But I think that there's a contracting with the world that we can't see that many times we choose unknowingly, but I think there's always that conscience that is saying, is this really the best choice? Is this really what you should be doing? Because there's this whole world beyond what we can see with our eyes and hear with our ears that actually is real and is influencing us. And that is also contractual. So I do fundamentally agree with you that there's a lot of this idea of contractual agreements, whether that's in the physical or spiritual realm. And we have to be on guard against all those forms of contracts that we consent to and think about their implications.
Exactly. And just reframing the way you look at those exchanges as contracts is just a very helpful approach and exercise in daily life. And it also underscores the concept that of free will, and that we are really accountable for how we contract and in what manner and with whom, um, whether it's a person, a thing, or an idea. We are really buying into that, and some kind of we're exchanging something with it. So sports and politics are two real prominent examples of things that we choose to uh, devote our spiritual, physical energy. We give to campaigns. We purchase the jerseys and the hats and the tickets to sports events and all that. And there's definitely a time and a place for it. But if there's additional energy left over, I really love the concept that Alex Zek and the Way Forward has been stressing for the last couple of years, and that's the idea of co-creation. So if you have the energy and other people have that energy and that consciousness, you don't have to be exactly in the same space at the same time, and you can, in many ways, create something. And that's the exciting thing that keeps me from just choking on the black pill at this moment.
Yeah, good point. I mean, I truly believe that we were all put here in part to create as our creator created and to have something significant to add to the world that we were given and the life we were given. So definitely agree with that. But I wanted to comment back, I want to circle back on the notion of contracting with what we expose ourselves to. And I think it's an important point, and we've covered it in past episodes, but thinking about even the music we choose to listen to, music is such a powerful tool for conveying emotions and also conveying messages, either overt or subliminal. And I've mentioned this before. I don't think at its core, or if you were to judge it as its own standalone video compared to all the videos in history, that it's a great video, but I think it brings a lot of good points out. There's that old video from, I believe, the 90s called They Sold Their Souls for Rock and Roll. That's one good documentary where it shows the power of music in conveying evil that people don't typically perceive. And even beyond that, I know that there have been independent investigators who have looked into the things that happen in the record music industry, and even things like uh, demonic or satanic chants or rituals being done before an album is released. Like, these things are real. And the reason I'm bringing this all up is I was just thinking about even personalities that were given in music. And I think about back in the 90s, who was one of the biggest bands there was in rock and roll, Guns N' Roses. Well, everyone knew him from Axl Rose with his do-rag and Slash with his big top hat. But those were essentially, for that time, they were two of the big Pied Pipers. But the Pied Pipers go way back in history and influencing society, and we've touched on a number of those, Elvis and beyond. There's always been some sort of Pied Piper getting people to go against their best interest in some way. And that's just one more example of, there are these big personalities that are influencing people. If it's not on the political theater
Sure.
or in the sports arena, it's on your radio or what you've got in your earbuds.
and they're promoted as agents of change, whether you believe that they're the change to be good and or bad. I mean, sometimes I've resisted change, and then in the end, I've come around to say, well, okay, that was good. There's not necessarily absolutes involved in all that, but there's definitely an agenda for change, and these figures, the bands, the singers, the genres, like gangster rap, totally manufactured, promoted. These things are given to us, handed to us. So that's that's really where my consciousness is right now. Just I've been a baseball fan all my life, and I'm probably not just gonna turn it off and never watch it. Uh, but I am increasingly mindful of its importance in the world, and I make time for it when I have the time, rather than letting it get in the way of other things. Whereas before it would be like, there's a game on, don't get in my way. So I think the way I like to operate is when something comes to your attention as possibly a conflict, then you either accept it and do nothing about it, or you act. And I try and raise my consciousness level and also change my behavior if I do recognize the kind of situation. And so my relationship with sports has evolved as a result, and that's just an example. And I will, from time to time, get in a, a bit of heated discussions with people who vote, because I've also withdrawn from the voter roll. And I will say, one of the great benefits of that is I don't get called for jury duty anymore. Meanwhile, other people in the household, every year they get that postcard and they get called. They got to call up that 800 number and find out whether they got to report to the courthouse that day. Um, but beyond that, it was just a consent thing for me. It was just saying, I don't like the way the league is run, to continue the sports metaphor, but in politics, um, I'm not a fan. And so therefore I'm withdrawing my attention and my fandom and my participation. And just as I don't judge myself, and I don't want to be judged myself for continuing to every once in a while watch a baseball game or check the scores. I even know what Pete Alonso is batting right now. I try not to judge other people for still hoping that the system will do good on their behalf when they pull that lever, however they vote.
Well, the reality is, I think most people don't think there's another way around everything. That their only choice is to either vote and pick a side or do nothing. And they're not aware of all these other thinkers and speakers out there who are proposing other ways to organize our lives and to build something different or participate in something completely different. It's just not advertised, and it really requires someone to want to seek something different out or to look for different truths. And most people are caught up in, the day-to-day keeping up with the Joneses life, and the thought of having to step too far outside of that is pretty daunting for most people. But yeah, to I agree with your earlier point that as long as you recognize what you're doing and you do that in moderation, it's like many other things. In small quantities, it can be okay. Look, I grew up in a town that was a big baseball town, and still watch from time to time, even though I know it's a big Masons game, just like politics.
Yeah.
For those who haven't looked into baseball and the Mason connection, it's very clear, and you can even find um, lectures by admitted Masons talking about how it really is a Mason's game, and even down to the baseball diamond, and how
Pitcher's mound 60 feet 6 inches from home plate.
it. So yeah, I mean, I think the underlying theme in a lot of what we've been discussing here today is that it's all rigged, and if you participate in any of it, you just have to know what you're getting into. But there might be better solutions than watching professional wrestling or participating in bread and circuses or voting harder to try to affect change. There's probably a better way out there. And I'm not the one to tell you which way, because I don't want to be one of those figureheads, because I don't have all the answers, but certainly it's food for thought for our listeners and everyone else to just think about what else could we be doing with our time.
Yeah, and we're open to suggestions as well. That's one thing we're not doing, is telling people what they should be doing or how they should be thinking. And we stress we're not judging anybody. We're just raising observations and awareness. And if people have something that they feel is worth investing our time in and paying attention to, by all means, we're open to that. So I wanted to conclude by mentioning where people can find this article that we've been discussing more or less today during this episode. And it turns out that, like one of our favorite writers, we are actually also on Substack, and you can find us at Reframing the Narrative on Substack. I think we're gaining a little momentum on the podcast and really finding our voice. And I look forward to achieving the same kind of continuity and momentum in our writing and the topics that we contribute to proposing on Substack as well.
Agreed. And I would just wrap up by saying that, yeah, we definitely always look forward to people's comments. Even if we don't agree with them, we appreciate them participating in not only listening, but adding their thoughts to this conversation and interacting with others who are listening. That's always fun to see. And I'll just do it another time. I haven't done it in a few episodes, but invite anyone who's listening to join us. We're just a couple dudes who eke out the time every week to do a podcast. So no one too small or too big is out of our bounds for being part of a discussion. So reach out to us. I know we have a number of ways to be contacted that are on our page, but we'd love to hear from you. And yeah, come be part of the discussion, come be part of the community. And until then, stay tuned for more.
Yeah, and next time we'll get together in a sports bar, watch the game, and talk about all these topics. It's the third inning. I got to go.
You just have to flood a country's public square with enough raw sewage. You just have to raise enough questions, spread enough dirt, plant enough conspiracy theorizing that citizens no longer know what to believe.